The sea roared like a beast unchained, its black waves clawing at the hull of Needle's Edge under a sky bruised with storms. Arya Stark stood at the prow, her cloak a tattered flag in the salt-stung wind, her gray eyes piercing a horizon where the world seemed to vanish. She'd slain kings, ended nightmares, and walked away from a throne others would kill for. But what do you seek when you've killed a god of death? Her fingers grazed Needle, the blade that had carried her from girlhood, its steel whispering memories of snow and loss. Behind her, ghosts crowded close, her father's steady voice, her mother's gentle hands, Jon's quiet laugh in the dark. Westeros was a fading dream, abandoned for this uncharted sea. Out here, who was Arya Stark? A wolf without a pack? A shadow without a mark? Or something the stars hadn't named? Close your eyes and see her now. A girl of 9, snowflakes in her hair, clutching a sword too small for wars but sharp enough to carve a legend. That's where her story begins. Not on this ship, but in a castle of ice and stone, where a wolf cub first learned to howl. Winterfell was a fortress of frost and firelight, its towers standing defiant against the northern winds. Arya darted through its courtyard, her boots kicking up powdery snow as she wove between stable boys hauling hay and guards, clashing swords in practice. She was 9, a whirlwind of tangled hair and defiance, her scraped knees a badge of honor. Sansa, her elder sister, sat primly in the great hall, her needle dancing through embroidery with the grace of a courtly dance. "You'll ruin your dress, Arya," Sansa scolded, her voice sharp with exasperation, her blue eyes narrowing. Arya grinned, thrusting an imaginary blade through the air. "I'd rather ruin a dragon." Her laughter echoed off the stone walls, a sound as wild as the dire wolves that prowled the gods' wood. Jon Snow, her half-brother, watched from the battlements, his dark eyes warm with understanding. He was the only one who saw the wolf in her, the spark no Septa's lessons could tame. One evening, as the sky burned crimson over the wolf's wood, he knelt before her, his black cloak pooling like ink on the snow. "Stick 'em with the pointy end," he said, pressing a slim sword into her hands, its balance perfect for her small grip. She named it Needle, a jab at Sansa's sewing, and swung it under the moonlight, dreaming of battles she'd never fight. Winterfell was her kingdom, its hearths glowing with warmth, its walls eternal. She thought it would last forever. Arya's days in Winterfell were a tapestry of mischief and dreams, each moment woven with the rough joy of childhood. She'd sneak into the kitchens, pilfering honey cakes from old Nan's watchful gaze, her fingers sticky as she fled the old storyteller's half-hearted swats. "You're a terror, child," Nan would mutter, but her eyes twinkled. Arya would climb the broken tower, its crumbling stones a playground for her daring, the wind tugging at her hair as she perched like a raven, surveying her domain. Robb, her eldest brother, would chase her through the godswood, his laughter booming as she dodged his grasp, leaping over roots and ducking under branches. Bran, small and eager, trailed her like a shadow, his curly hair bouncing as he begged to join her adventures. "You're too little," she'd tease, ruffling his hair, but she'd let him tag along, his wide eyes drinking in her tales of warrior queens and far-off lands. Catelyn, their mother, tried to mold her into a lady, her voice soft but firm as she brushed Arya's hair until it shone. "A Stark must be proper," she'd say, her hands gentle but insistent. But Arya squirmed, her heart racing for the clash of steel in the yard, not the clink of teacups in the hall. At night, she'd lie awake, needle hidden beneath her pillow, whispering stories to herself of Nymeria, the warrior queen who sailed across the sea. Her direwolf pup, named for that queen, slept at her feet, its amber eyes a mirror of Arya's restless spirit. Winterfell was a song, and she was its wildest note. But songs end, and innocence is a fragile thing. When King Robert Baratheon rode north, his laughter shaking Winterfell's halls like a storm, Ned Stark was named Hand of the King. Arya overheard the news in the stables, her hands sticky with apple juice as she fed a carrot to her pony. "South?" she whispered to Nymeria, her heart buzzing with excitement. King's Landing promised knights, tourneys, and secrets, adventures she'd only read about in old Nan's tales. She followed her father, Sansa, at her side, leaving Winterfell's snow for a city of sun and stone. The journey south was a blur of dusty roads and creaking carts, Arya riding ahead with the guards, her eyes wide as she drank in the changing landscape. Green hills, winding rivers, villages bustling with life. Sansa chattered about Joffrey, the Golden Prince, but Arya only snorted, her mind on swords, not suitors. The Red Keep loomed when they arrived, a fortress of red stone that gleamed under the southern sun. But to Arya, it was a gilded cage. Its halls crawled with lords who smiled like vipers, their whispers sharp as daggers. She hated it, the heavy dresses that tangled her legs, the endless curtsies that made her feel like a puppet, the giggles of court ladies who called her Arya Underfoot. Sansa thrived, her eyes starry for Joffrey's charm, but Arya saw only his smirk, cruel as a blade's edge. She'd slip away to the stables or the godswood, needle her secret comfort, its weight a reminder of Jon and home. Her only refuge in King's Landing was Syrio Forel, a Braavosi swordmaster hired by Ned to teach her swordplay, disguised as dancing lessons. Syrio was lean as a whip, with a grin like a fox and a wooden blade that moved like water. "What do we say to the god of death?" he'd ask, parrying her clumsy strikes in a dusty courtyard. "Not today," she'd pant, her feet learning the water dance, her body weaving through his attacks like a cat. Syrio taught her to see with her eyes, not just her heart, to hear the world's rhythm, every creak of a gate, every rustle of a cloak. Needle became her voice, light and deadly, its tip singing as she practiced under the Red Keep's looming towers. She'd spar until her arms ached, ignoring the snickers of passing courtiers, her world narrowing to the dance of steel. But danger stirred in the shadows. Ned's honor clashed with Cersei's cunning, and whispers of treason coiled around the Stark name. Arya overheard fragments, plots, betrayals, while hiding in the Red Keep's forgotten passages, her small frame slipping through dusty tunnels lit by flickering torches. She'd crawl beneath tapestries, her heart pounding as she caught snatches of words. Baratheon. Lannister. King. She told Sansa, but her sister laughed it off, too lost in Joffrey's flattery. Arya's unease grew, a knot in her chest she couldn't name. One morning she saw her father limping, his face drawn with pain, his eyes heavy with secrets. "Stay close, Arya," he told her, his hand resting on her shoulder. She nodded, needle strapped to her side, but the world was moving too fast, a current pulling her under. The Sept of Baelor changed everything. Arya had slipped away from her Septa's lessons, bored by prayers and itching for the city's chaos. A crowd's roar drew her to the great Sept, its marble steps gleaming under the sun. She pushed through the mob, her small frame slipping between elbows and cloaks, her heart uneasy. Ned stood on a platform, his hands bound, his beard streaked with dirt, his gray eyes calm despite the chains. Joffrey, golden and cruel, smirked from his throne, his green eyes glinting with malice. Arya's breath caught, her hands trembling as she shoved forward. "Father!" she screamed, but her voice was drowned by the crowd's jeers. The executioner's sword gleamed, its edge catching the light, and time slowed. She saw Ned's eyes, steady even now, and then the blade fell. His head rolled, and the mob roared, a sound that shook the earth. Arya's world went silent. She didn't cry. She couldn't. Something inside her hardened, sharp as needle's edge, a fire kindling in her chest. A rough hand yanked her back. Yoren, a grizzled Night's Watch recruiter, his face grim as he dragged her into an alley. "Don't look, girl," he growled, his eyes darting for gold cloaks. But she'd seen. She'd always see. Moments like these break us, don't they? When the world you love crumbles, what keeps you standing? Share your story in the comments below because for Arya, it was a spark, a rage that would carry her through the dark. King's Landing was a death trap now, its streets crawling with Lannister soldiers hunting Ned's kin. Yoren acted fast, hacking off Arya's hair with a blunt knife, the strands falling like snow to the cobblestones. He stuffed her into boy's clothes, rough wool scratching her skin, and named her Arya, a recruit bound for the wall. "Keep your mouth shut and your eyes open," he warned, shoving her into a cart with other ragged boys, their faces gaunt with hunger. The road north was a nightmare. Hunger clawed her belly, and men leered like wolves, their eyes lingering on her small frame. She learned to hide her fear, to watch every shadow, to sleep with needle clutched tight. Gendry, a blacksmith's bastard with calloused hands and a quiet strength, shared his fire, his silence a comfort in the cold. Hot Pie, round and nervous, offered scraps of stale bread, his endless chatter a distraction from the ache in her bones. They were her first friends since Winterfell, but trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. The Lannisters ambushed their group, their crimson banners fluttering like blood in the wind. Yoren fell, arrows sprouting from his chest, his last shout urging her to run. Arya fled, needle in hand, her heart pounding as she dove into a thicket. Harrenhal loomed ahead, a fortress of despair where hope went to die. Captured, she was no longer Arya but a nameless girl, scrubbing floors and dodging blows from guards who saw her as less than dirt. The castle reeked of blood and fear, its halls echoing with the screams of the tortured. In the dark, she whispered her list. Joffrey, Cersei, the Mountain. Names to kill, names to live for. A stranger appeared one night, his face pale, his eyes like polished coins in the dim light of her cell. "A girl names 3 deaths," Jaqen H'ghar said, his voice a riddle wrapped in silk. She chose torturers, not kings, her rage precise and personal, targeting men who'd broken the weak for sport. Jaqen's kills were swift, silent, and terrifying, each one a lesson in power. When he gave her a coin, its surface etched with strange runes, and the words Valar Morghulis, she hid them deep, a secret for a girl who'd forgotten how to hope. Escape came, but at a cost. Blood on her hands, friends lost to the night. Gendry and Hot Pie vanished into the chaos, their faces fading like ghosts. Arya slipped through Harrenhal's gates, her heart a litany of names, her path leading ever onward into a world that offered no mercy. Westeros was a graveyard, and she was a ghost with a sword, her small frame carrying a rage that would shake kingdoms. The Riverlands were a festering wound on Westeros, its fields churned to sludge, its skies choked with the acrid smoke of burning villages. Arya Stark, barely 12, slipped through the shadows like a hunted fox, her boy's clothes tattered, needle concealed beneath a cloak stiff with dirt and blood. Harrenhal's horrors lingered in her mind. Screams of the flayed, the clank of rusted chains, the stench of rotting flesh. But she was free, for now. Freedom was a brittle thing, earned with cunning, and a blade that had tasted its first kill. Her list grew longer with every weary step. Joffrey, Cersei, the Mountain, and now others. Their faces carved into her soul like runes on a gravestone. The coin from Jaqen H'ghar burned in her pocket, its strange warmth a riddle she wasn't ready to unravel. Where do you go when home is ash? When family is a fading echo? For Arya, the answer was forward, into a world that wanted her dead, her heart pounding a rhythm of vengeance. The wind howled through skeletal trees, and she clutched needle tighter, her only friend in a land where trust was a death sentence. The road was a graveyard of broken dreams, littered with shattered carts, abandoned tools, and corpses bloated by rain. Arya's boots sank into the mire as she darted from one hiding place to the next, her gray eyes scanning for danger. Bandits, soldiers, or worse. Hunger was her shadow, clawing at her belly until she scavenged a half-rotten apple from a deserted farmstead, its sour bite stinging her tongue but fueling her steps. She learned to move at dusk, when the light was dim and predators lazy, her small frame blending with the underbrush. The Riverlands were alive with peril. Wolves howled in the distance, and whispers of war carried on the wind. She'd seen what war did to the weak. Villages reduced to embers, children left to starve, women dragged screaming into the dark. Each sight hardened her, sharpening the edge of her rage. One night, she stumbled upon a burned-out sept, its stone walls blackened, its altar defiled. She knelt in the ashes, not to pray, but to whisper her list. Joffrey, Cersei, the mountain. The words were a vow, a tether to the girl she'd been before King's Landing stole her father. She rose, needle steady in her hand, and vanished into the forest, her heart a drumbeat of purpose. She wasn't alone for long. A band of outlaws spotted her silhouette against a dusk-lit hill, their laughter rough as they surrounded her. "What's a runt like you doing out here?" one growled, his beard flecked with grease. Arya's hand twitched toward Needle, but she was outnumbered, her body aching from days without rest. They dragged her to their camp, a sprawl of tents and cookfires hidden in a ravine. The Brotherhood without banners, they called themselves, a ragged crew led by Beric Dondarrion, a lord with a scarred face and a single eye that gleamed like a dying star. His sword flickered with unnatural fire, a gift from some god Arya didn't believe in. "We fight for the small folk," Beric said, his voice hollow, as if death had already claimed half of him. Arya didn't care for their cause. She'd seen too much betrayal to trust promises, but their camp offered food and shelter, a rare mercy in a land of wolves. Gendry was there, the blacksmith's bastard she'd met on the road to the wall, his hammer ringing against steel as he forged blades for the Brotherhood. "You're no boy," he said one night, catching her washing blood from her hands by a stream, her short hair betraying her disguise. She smirked, needle glinting in the moonlight. "I'm no lady either." Gendry's steady presence was a comfort, but Arya kept her distance, her heart too bruised for friendship. Life with the Brotherhood was a chaotic dance of raids and campfires, a world where loyalty was as fleeting as the morning mist. Arya learned to sharpen blades, mend cloaks, and listen without being seen, her small size a cloak of invisibility among the rough men. She'd perch on crates, watching their sparring matches, memorizing their moves, how Thoros of Myr swung his flaming sword, how Ongi the archer knocked arrows with lethal grace. Her fingers itched for Needle, but she kept it hidden, knowing a girl with a sword would draw questions. The Brotherhood's camp was a living thing, pulsing with songs, curses, and the clink of stolen coin. At night, they'd gather around fires, swapping tales of battles and betrayals. Beric was a puzzle, a man who died and risen, his body a map of wounds. "The Lord of Light has plans for you," he told her once, his voice low as he sharpened his blade. Arya scoffed, her faith in gods shattered with her father's head, but his words lingered, a splinter in her mind. She'd sneak into the woods to practice with Needle, her movements clumsy but growing sharper, Sirio's lessons echoing in her mind. See with your eyes. The Brotherhood gave her purpose, but not peace. They fed her, clothed her, but their eyes held no warmth, only calculation. The illusion of safety shattered when Melisandre rode into camp, her red robes glowing like blood against the gray dawn. The priestess's eyes burned like coals, and her voice was a siren's call, promising power and salvation. "The Lord of Light demands a sacrifice," she said, her gaze locking on Gendry. Arya's stomach twisted. She knew that look, the hunger of those who traded lives for gain. The Brotherhood sold Gendry for a sack of gold, their justice revealed as a lie. Arya confronted Beric, her voice sharp as Needle's point. "You're no better than the Lannisters," she spat, her small frame trembling with rage. Beric's eye flickered, but he turned away, his silence a betrayal. Melisandre approached her later, her fingers brushing Arya's cheek like a brand. "I see darkness in you," she whispered, her breath hot. "Eyes that will shut forever." Arya jerked back, her hand on needle, and ran, the priestess's prophecy clinging like damp rot. She slipped into the forest, her heart pounding, vowing never to trust again. The Brotherhood had taught her a truth. Loyalty was a coin, easily spent, and she was worth nothing to men who served gods or gold. Moments like these forge us, don't they? When trust crumbles, what keeps you fighting? If you're curious about another soul shaped by betrayal, check out our video on Jon Snow's journey. It's linked in the description. Fate wasn't done with her. Sandor Clegane, the Hound, emerged from the shadows like a nightmare, his scarred face twisted in a snarl. "Scream and I'll gut you," he growled, his massive hand yanking her onto his horse like a sack of grain. She hated him, this killer who'd served Joffrey, who'd cut down her friend Micah years ago on a whim. His name was on her list, a vow she whispered in the dark, but she was no match for his strength, her small frame dwarfed by his bulk. The Hound was no simple monster, though. He kept her alive, his gruff voice cutting through the silence of their journey across the Riverlands. "World's full of wolves, little wolf," he said one night, tossing her a strip of dried meat as they camped in a ditch. "You'd best learn to bite." They wandered, two broken things in a broken land, scavenging from abandoned farms and dodging Lannister patrols. Arya learned to read his grunts, to see the man beneath the scars, a man who hated his brother, the Mountain, as fiercely as she hated Joffrey. He wasn't kind, but he was honest, and in a world of lies, that was something. They shared silences heavier than words, their bond a tangle of hate and need. "You're not so different," he said once, his voice rough as gravel, a wineskin dangling from his hand. "You've got hate in you, too." She didn't answer, but her list whispered back, a prayer against the dark. Their uneasy alliance carried them through weeks of mud and misery. The Hound taught her to kill cleanly, to watch for weakness, lessons she absorbed like a sponge, though she'd never admit it. She taught him to flinch at her glares, her defiance a spark he couldn't snuff. They camped in ditches, ate stolen bread, and dodged bounty hunters seeking the Stark girl. One night, by a flickering fire, the Hound spoke of his brother, his voice low with loathing. "He burned me," he said, touching his scarred face, the flames casting shadows on his ruined skin. "Family's no different from strangers. Everyone cuts you in the end." Arya stared into the fire, thinking of Sansa, of Robb, of her father's head rolling in the dust. She didn't argue. The Riverlands were a maze of danger, and they moved like ghosts, avoiding villages where Lannister banners flew. Arya's dreams were haunted by Nymeria, her direwolf, now wild and fierce, leading a pack through the wilderness. In those dreams, she ran with her wolf, free and untamed, but dawn always brought her back to the Hound's shadow. The twins loomed like a curse, its squat towers glowering over the green fork, their stones slick with river mist. The Hound planned to ransom Arya to her mother and brother, who were there for Edmure Tully's wedding. Arya's heart leapt at the thought of Catelyn and Robb, her last anchors in a world gone mad. She imagined their arms around her, the warmth of Winterfell's hearths, the sound of Robb's laughter. But her wolf dreams told a darker tale. Through Nymeria's eyes, she saw the red wedding unfold. Robb's body riddled with arrows, his direwolf Grey Wind slaughtered, Catelyn's throat slit as she screamed for her son. The hall was a slaughterhouse, blood pooling on the stone floor, the air thick with betrayal. Arya woke screaming, her nails digging into her palms, her body shaking as the Hound's horse galloped beneath her. "They're gone," he said, his grip bruising as he dragged her away from the twins, the sounds of slaughter fading into the night. She fought, clawed, but he held fast, his voice a low growl. "You can't save them, girl." The world was empty now, her family reduced to names on a list: Walder Frey, Rose Bolton, Tywin Lannister. Her screams turned to silence, her grief a blade she buried deep. The Hound became her captor, her shield, her mirror. They roamed, scavenging and hiding, their bond a tangle of hate and need. He taught her to kill with precision, to spot a man's weakness in the way he stood or breathed. She taught him to flinch at her defiance, her eyes burning with a fire he couldn't quench. They moved through the Riverlands like ghosts, their path marked by stolen chickens and abandoned campsites. One evening, they sheltered in a cave, rain hammering the earth outside. The hound sat by a small fire, his face half hidden in shadow. "You ever think about stopping?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. "Letting go of that list?" Arya stared at him, her hand on needle. "Not today," she said, echoing Sirio's words. He grunted, passing her a wineskin, and for a moment they were just two souls adrift in a world that cared for neither. But the peace was fleeting. At a crossroads they fought, him drunk, her desperate, and she drove needle into his side, her hands shaking as she struck. He fell, blood seeping into the dirt, his eyes locked on hers. "You're on my list," she lied, her voice trembling as she backed away. She left him to die by a riverbank, his scarred face haunting her, a reflection of the killer she might become. Alone again, Arya wandered, her body weary but her will unbroken. The Riverlands were a labyrinth of danger, but she was learning its rules: hide, watch, strike. She stole bread from a baker's cart, drank from streams, and slept in hollowed trees, Needle her only companion. Her dreams of Nymeria grew stronger, the wolf's amber eyes a beacon in the dark. One dawn, she reached a port, the air thick with salt and the cries of gulls. The coin from Jaqen was heavy in her hand, its runes catching the light. "Valar Morgulis," she told a ship's captain, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. He nodded, his eyes curious but silent, and pointed to a ship bound for Braavos. Arya stepped aboard, the deck swaying beneath her feet, her heart a storm of rage and resolve. Westeros faded behind her, its shores swallowed by mist. The girl who'd fled King's Landing was gone. In her place was something new, something sharp, something hungry, something that would not break. Braavos waited, a city of canals and secrets, and Arya sailed toward it, her list a vow, her blade a promise, her future a shadow yet to be cast. Braavos rose from the mist like a dream woven from shadows, its canals glinting like silver veins under a moon that never seemed to fade. Arya Stark, now 13, stood on the deck of a swaying ship, her boy's clothes salt-crusted, Needle hidden beneath a cloak that smelled of sea and sorrow. Westeros was a fading wound, left behind with the blood of the Red Wedding and the Hound's dying eyes. The coin from Jaqen H'ghar had brought her here, across a sea of grief, to a city where death was both art and God. She was no longer the girl who'd fled King's Landing, nor the child who'd whispered names in the dark. But who was she? A wolf cub lost in a strange land? A killer with a list that never shrank? Or something the gods hadn't dared to name? The house of black and white loomed ahead, its doors one ebony, one weirwood, like a choice she wasn't ready to make. Her heart pounded, a mix of fear and hunger, as she stepped ashore, the coin heavy in her hand. Braavos was a new world, but could it forge a new Arya? Or would it break her, as Westeros had tried? The city was a labyrinth of canals and cobblestones, its air thick with salt, spice, and secrets. Arya wandered its streets, her eyes wide but wary, drinking in the sights, merchants haggling in a dozen tongues, Braavos dueling with slender blades, courtesans gliding past in boats draped with silk. Braavos was alive, pulsing with a rhythm she didn't yet understand, its mists cloaking her like a second skin. She slept in alleys, stole bread from market stalls, and learned to blend with the crowd, her small frame a shadow among the bustle. The House of Black and White was her destination, but she lingered, testing this new world. One night, she watched a street performer juggle fire, his hands a blur, and felt a pang for Winterfell's hearths, for Jon's laughter. She pushed the memory down, her fingers brushing Needle's hilt, a reminder of who she'd become. The coin led her to the temple's steps, its doors stark against the city's color. She knocked, her heart a drumbeat, and the doors opened silently, revealing a darkness that swallowed light. A man with a kind face waited inside, his eyes ancient, despite his smile. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice soft as a whisper. "No one," she said, the lie bitter on her tongue. He nodded, as if he'd expected it, and beckoned her in. The House of Black and White was her new home, but it felt like a tomb. The temple was a labyrinth of silence, its halls lit by candles that never burned out, their flames casting shadows that danced like ghosts. The Faceless Men were neither kind nor cruel, only relentless, their purpose as unyielding as the stone beneath Arya's feet. "A girl must become no one," the kindly man said, his face shifting like water, now young, now old. Arya tried, shedding her name, her clothes, her past. She scrubbed bodies in the temple's pools, preparing them for death's embrace, her hands raw from the cold water. She learned to lie, to wear faces like masks, to kill with a whisper of poison or a flick of a blade. But Needle stayed buried, not burned, hidden beneath a rock by the canal, a tether to Arya Stark. "Who are you?" the kindly man asked daily, his eyes boring into her soul. "No one," she lied, but her heart sang of Winterfell, of Jon, of home. Every lesson was a test, every test a blade. She learned to change her voice, to walk like a sailor or a beggar, to see the world through stolen eyes. But the cost was high. The temple's silence pressed against her, a weight that drowned her dreams. She'd lie on her pallet at night, staring at the stone ceiling, whispering her list to keep Arya alive. Joffrey, Cersei, the Mountain. The names were a shield, but they couldn't hide her from herself. The waif, a faceless girl with eyes like daggers, became her shadow, her rival, her tormentor. "You'll never be one of us," she hissed, her blade flashing in the temple's dim halls during sparring sessions. The waif was older, faster, her movements precise as a viper's strike. Arya fought back, her Braavosi training melding with Syrio's water dance. But she was always a step behind, her body bruised from the waif's blows. The kindly man watched, his silence a judgment. "A girl clings to self," he said, his voice a warning. "Self must die." Arya's defiance flared. She wasn't ready to let Arya Stark go. One night she slipped out to retrieve Needle, her fingers trembling as she dug it from its hiding place. The blade gleamed in the moonlight, a piece of Winterfell in a city of strangers. She practiced in an alley, her movements sharper now, Syrio's voice in her mind. Not today. But the temple's eyes were everywhere. When she killed a cruel merchant not on their list, a man who'd beaten a beggar girl, she paid a price. The kindly man took her sight, plunging her into darkness. Blind, she begged on Braavos' streets, her senses sharpening. Every footstep, every breath a map of the world. The world became a symphony of sounds, the lap of canal water, the creak of cartwheels, the murmur of voices. She learned to fight blind, her stick a clumsy substitute for Needle, her body adapting to a world without light. Moments like these redefine us, don't they? When you're stripped of everything, what keeps you going? Share your story in the comments below, because for Arya, it was a spark, a refusal to break. Her sight returned, earned through blood and will, but the lesson stayed. Fear was a teacher, not a master. The waif's attacks grew fiercer, her hatred a tangible thing. "You don't belong," she spat, her blade nicking Arya's arm during a sparring match, blood welling on her skin. Arya's rage flared, but she learned to channel it, her movements growing precise, her mind sharp as Needle's point. The temple's lessons were endless. Poisons that killed with a drop, faces that slipped on like gloves, secrets that could topple kings. But Arya's heart rebelled. She dreamed of Nymeria, her direwolf, leading a pack through Westeros's wilds, their howls a call to return. The kindly man sensed her struggle. "A girl must choose," he said, his face blank as stone. No one or nothing. Arya's defiance crystallized. She'd never be no one. The waif came for her one night, a predator in the dark, her blade a whisper of death. They fought through Braavos' alleys, cobblestones slick with rain, their shadows merging in the torchlight. Arya was faster now, her training complete. She struck, needle finding the waif's heart, and the faceless girl fell, her blood pooling in the canal. "I'm Arya Stark," she told the kindly man, her voice steady, her eyes burning. "And I'm going home." Leaving the house of black and white was like shedding a skin. Arya retrieved needle, its weight a promise, and walked Braavos' streets one last time. The city had changed her, taught her to kill, to hide, to survive, but it couldn't erase the wolf in her blood. She stole a cloak from a market stall, bartered for passage on a ship, and stood at the docks, the sea stretching before her like a challenge. Westeros called, a land of ash and vengeance, and Arya answered, her list a vow, her heart a storm. The ship sailed west, Braavos fading into mist, and Arya felt the weight of her choices, each one a step toward a destiny she couldn't yet see. She was no longer a child, but not yet whole, a girl with a sword, a list, and a name that refused to die. The waves of the narrow sea churned like a restless beast, their foam glinting under a sky heavy with clouds. Arya Stark stood at the bow of a creaking ship, her cloak snapping in the salt-laced wind, her gray eyes fixed on the jagged shores of Westeros. Braavos had forged her into a weapon, sharp, silent, deadly, but it couldn't erase the wolf in her blood. She was 16 now, no longer the girl who'd fled King's Landing or the shadow who'd danced with death in the House of Black and White. Her list was shorter, but its weight was heavier. Walder Frey, Cersei, those who'd torn her family apart. Needle hung at her side, its steel a quiet promise of vengeance. Westeros was a land of ash and memory, calling her back to finish what she'd started. But what does a killer become when her list runs dry? A hero? A wanderer? Or something the gods hadn't dared to name? The ship cut through the waves, and Arya's heart beat with purpose, her past a storm, her future a shadow. She was returning, but not to stay, never to stay. The Riverlands welcomed her with rain and ruin, its fields scarred by war, its rivers swollen with the ghosts of the fallen. Arya moved like a specter, her faceless training cloaking her in silence. She'd learned to wear faces, to kill with a glance, and now she wielded those skills like a blade. Her target was House Frey, the traitors who'd orchestrated the Red Wedding, slaughtering her mother and brother in a hall of betrayal. She infiltrated the twins as a serving girl, her face stolen from a dead maid, her movements precise as she poured wine and dodged leering hands. The Freys were a nest of vipers, their laughter grating as they toasted their treachery. Walder Frey sat at the high table, his wrinkled face smug, his sons and grandsons sprawled around him. Arya waited, her heart steady, her hands steady. At the feast's peak, she slipped poison into their cups, a gift from Braavos that killed with a whisper. The hall fell silent as the Freys choked, their faces purpling, their bodies crumpling like discarded rags. "The North remembers," she whispered, her voice low, her eyes locked on Walder's fading gaze. She shed the maid's face and slipped away, the twins a tomb behind her. Her list was shorter, but the weight didn't lift. Vengeance was a hollow victory, a fire that burned but didn't warm. Winterfell called, a beacon in the storm of her heart. Arya rode north, her horse a stolen gelding, her path winding through forests and frost. The North was a land of snow and silence, its beauty stark and unforgiving. She traveled by night, avoiding Bolton banners and wildling raiders, her faceless senses sharp, every snap of a twig, every shift in the wind a warning. Her dreams were filled with Nymeria, her direwolf, now leading a pack through the wolfswood, their howls a song of freedom. One dawn, she crested a hill and saw Winterfell's towers, their stone weathered but standing, the direwolf banner flapping in the wind. Her breath caught, memories flooding back. Robb's laughter, Bran's climbing, Jon's quiet strength. She slipped into the castle as a stranger, her face that of a kitchen girl, her heart pounding. Sansa stood in the great hall, regal in furs, her auburn hair a crown of fire. Bran sat by the hearth, his eyes distant, his voice soft with wisdom no boy should carry. They were her family, but strangers too, carved by wars she hadn't fought. Arya revealed herself, shedding the stolen face, and Sansa's gasp broke the silence. They embraced, their tears a bridge over years of loss, but the reunion was bittersweet. Too much had changed. Winterfell was home, but it was also a battlefield. The Boltons were gone, their treachery ended, but a greater threat loomed. The White Walkers, led by the Night King, a force of ice and death. Jon Snow returned, his face scarred, his eyes heavy with burdens Arya couldn't name. He was her anchor, the brother who'd given her needle, but he was different now, a man forged by betrayal and resurrection. "You're still my sister," he said, his voice rough, his hand resting on her shoulder. She nodded, but her heart was restless. She wasn't made for hearths or halls. The long night descended, a storm of darkness that swallowed Winterfell. Arya fought beside Jon, her blade a flicker in the chaos, her faceless training guiding her through the tide of whites. The dead swarmed, their eyes blue as frost, their claws tearing at the living. She moved like a shadow, needle slicing through decayed flesh, her breath misting in the cold. The Godswood was the final stand, where Bran waited, his eyes white as he wove his strange magic. The Night King approached, his crown of ice gleaming, his spear raised. Time slowed. Arya's training, Sirio's dance, the Faceless Men's precision, converged in a single moment. She leapt from the shadows, her dagger flashing, and drove it into the Night King's heart. He shattered, a cascade of ice, and his army crumbled to dust. Winterfell gasped, saved by a girl no one expected. The cheers were deafening, but Arya felt hollow. Heroism was a weight, not a reward. Victory brought no peace. Bran took the Iron Throne, a king who saw through time, his voice calm but distant. Sansa claimed the North, her rule steady, her eyes sharp with lessons hard-learned. Jon chose exile, his path leading beyond the wall, his farewell a quiet ache in Arya's chest. She could have stayed. A lady, a knight, a sister, but Winterfell was a cage, its walls too close, its hearths too warm. Her list was done, her purpose gone, and the girl who'd killed a god felt adrift. She chose the sea, Needle's Edge, her new home, its direwolf sails catching the wind as she sailed west, beyond the sunset sea. Her crew, Braavosi sailors, Westerosi outcasts, dreamers with nowhere else to go, followed her into the unknown, their eyes wary but loyal. The sea was a world of its own, its waves a song of freedom and danger. Storms tested her, waves rising like mountains, their crests white with fury. Arya stood at the helm, her voice cutting through the roar, her faceless senses guiding the ship through walls of water. One night, a sea beast struck, its coils gleaming, its eyes like lanterns in the dark. Arya leapt to the deck, needle flashing, her movements a dance of death. The crew fought beside her, their spears piercing the creature's hide, and it sank, its blood staining the waves. They cheered her name, but she only nodded, her eyes on the horizon, her heart a storm of questions. Weeks later, an island rose from the sea, its cliffs jagged, its ruins carved with runes older than dragons. Arya led a small party ashore, her boots crunching on black sand, her senses alert. The ruins were a maze of stone, their walls etched with symbols that hummed with power, spirals, eyes, waves. She found a chamber deep within, its floor a mosaic of a great beast, its eyes glowing faintly. A stone map lay at its center, half crumbled but pointing to a greater land west. She traced its lines, her fingers trembling, her mind racing with possibilities. Was this the edge of the world, or the beginning of another? The crew whispered of curses, but Arya felt a pull, like Nymeria's howl in her blood. They sailed on, the map her guide, the sea her challenge. The horizon stretched endless, a canvas of blue and gray, and Arya stood at the prow, her cloak snapping, her heart a mix of fear and hunger. She was no longer a killer, no longer a hero. She was something new, a wanderer chasing a truth she couldn't yet name. The great land came at last, a continent of jungles and stone cities, its air thick with the scent of moss and salt. Arya named it Westland, a name whispered in her journal, its pages now filled with sketches of runes and waves. The light folk greeted her, a people with skin like bronze and eyes that gleamed with quiet wisdom. Their villages were built of stone and vine, their lives tied to the rhythms of the forest and sea. Arya approached as a stranger, her faceless skills cloaking her intent, but the light folk saw through her disguise, their leader, a woman with silver hair and a staff carved with shells, offering a smile. "You carry a wolf's heart," she said, her voice like the tide. Arya learned their tongue, her Braavosi training aiding her, and listened to their stories, tales of ancient travelers, of lights that danced in the sky, of a world beyond the sea. The light folk were divided, some tribes seeking war over sacred lands, their spears sharp with intent. Arya saw echoes of Westeros in their strife, and her heart stirred. She'd seen too much blood to let it spill again. She brokered peace, her voice steady as she stood between warring leaders, her tales of the Red Wedding and the Long Night silencing their pride. "War leaves only bones," she said, her eyes burning with memory. The light folk listened, their spears lowered, their hands clasped in truce. They taught her their ways, to navigate by starlight, to weave nets from vine, to see in the dark with a touch of their strange magic. Arya absorbed it all, her mind a sponge, her heart restless. She dreamed of Winterfell, of Sansa's crown, of Jon's exile, and woke with a question. Who was she without her wars? The light folk offered her a home, a place among their fires, but Arya declined, her gaze fixed on the horizon. She was a Stark, but not only a Stark, a wolf, but not bound to a pack. Needle's Edge sailed on, its crew stronger, its captain changed. The sea stretched before her, a challenge and a promise, and Arya stood at the helm, her heart a map of scars, her future a shadow yet to be cast. The sunset sea stretched like an endless tapestry, its waves whispering secrets no map could hold, their crests catching the light of a moon veiled by clouds. Arya Stark stood at the helm of Needle's Edge, her hair tangled by salt and wind, her gray eyes scanning a horizon that promised both peril and possibility. She was 16, a girl who'd slain a god, ended a dynasty, and walked away from a kingdom others would die for. Westland's jungles and light folk were behind her, their lessons of peace and starlight tucked away like Needle's blade. But questions lingered, heavier than any storm. Who was she when the killing stopped? A Stark bound by blood? A shadow forged by vengeance? Or something the world hadn't named? The sea was her canvas now, its vastness a mirror for her restless heart. One twilight, a fog rolled in, thick and shimmering, like a veil woven from starlight and dreams. It swallowed the ship, cloaking the stars, and Arya felt a pull, like Nymeria's howl echoing in her blood. Where do you go when the sea itself calls your name? She gripped the helm, her heart a storm, her future a shadow yet to be cast. The fog was no ordinary mist. It pulsed with a life of its own, its tendrils curling like fingers around Needle's Edge. The crew whispered of curses, their faces pale as they clutched ropes and muttered prayers to gods Arya didn't believe in. She silenced them with a look, her voice steady as she ordered the sails trimmed. "We keep moving," she said, her faceless senses sharp. catching every creak of the ship, every shift in the air. The fog parted, revealing an island aglow with eerie light, its cliffs jagged as broken teeth, its shores fringed with black sand. The crew hesitated, their eyes wide, but Arya felt it. A call, deep and ancient, like the heartbeat of the world. "Stay here," she told them, strapping needle to her side and a faceless dagger to her boot. Her boots hit the sand with a soft crunch, and she moved inland, her heart pounding, her senses alive. The island was a maze of vines and ruins, their stones etched with runes older than Valyria, their surfaces humming with power. Twisted trees loomed, their branches clawing at the sky, and the air was heavy with the scent of moss and salt. Arya's hand rested on Needle, her training keeping fear at bay, but the island felt alive, watching her with unseen eyes. She climbed a ridge, her breath misting in the chill, and found a lake at the island's heart, its surface glowing like molten stars, its waters still as glass. A figure waited on the shore, cloaked in shadow, its presence both soft and sharp, like a blade wrapped in silk. "Arya Stark, no one, wolf girl, slayer of night," the figure said, its voice a riddle, its eyes hidden beneath a hood. "Which name is yours?" It called itself the Name-Caller, a being neither man nor god, its form shifting slightly, now tall, now small, now familiar in a way that made Arya's skin prickle. She tightened her grip on Needle, her voice steady. "I choose my name." The Name-Caller tilted its head as if amused and pointed to the lake. "Then see it," it said. "Step in, or leave forever." Arya hesitated, her heart a battleground of doubt and defiance. The lake's glow was hypnotic, its surface rippling with whispers of her past. Ned's voice, Sansa's laugh, Jon's quiet strength. She'd faced death, but this was different, a challenge to her very soul. She stepped forward, the water cold as ice, burning her skin as it rose to her knees, her chest, her neck. The world dissolved, and visions came, sharp and unrelenting, each one a blade to her heart. She saw Ned's execution, her scream lost in the crowd, the sword falling like a guillotine. The red wedding unfolded, Robb's body pierced, Catelyn's throat slit, blood pooling on stone. Braavos flashed before her, her blood on cobblestones as the waif struck, her blind days begging in the streets. The visions shifted, and her family appeared. Sansa, regal in furs, asking, "Where is my sister?" Jon, scarred and silent, whispering, "You're enough." Bran, eyes white as snow, saying, "You are more than your list." Then her own face, blank as a faceless mask, taunted, "Be no one, be free." Arya's heart roared, her voice tearing through the visions. "I'm Arya Stark," she shouted, the lake rippling wildly. "But I'm not just that." The Name-Caller watched, its form steady now, its voice a low hum. "Stay, learn the old magics, become a keeper of truths. Know who you are." Arya stood in the lake, water dripping from her hair, her heart a storm of memory and choice. She thought of Winterfell, of Sansa's crown, of Jon's exile. Chains disguised as love, duties that would bind her. The island offered answers, a chance to understand the girl who'd killed a god, but it was another cage, its magic a weight she didn't want. "I'll find out on my own," she said, her voice firm, her eyes burning with resolve. She stepped from the lake, her boots sinking into the soft earth, and her hand brushed a stone on the shore, small and glowing like a fallen star. She took it, its warmth pulsing in her palm, a promise to return if her path led her back. The Name-Caller faded, its shadow dissolving into the mist, and Arya climbed back to the shore, her heart lighter but no less restless. The island's glow dimmed behind her, its secrets left unanswered, its call a whisper she'd carry forever. Needle's Edge waited, its crew tense but loyal, their faces easing as Arya boarded. They saw the change in her, quieter, fiercer, her eyes distant yet sharp. "West," she ordered, her voice cutting through their murmurs, and the ship sailed on, the fog lifting to reveal a sky ablaze with stars. The crew worked in silence, their hands steady on ropes, their trust in her unspoken but ironclad. Arya stood at the prow, the stone in her pocket, its faint glow a reminder of the choice she'd made. That night, she sat in her cabin, the ship rocking gently, and opened her journal, its pages worn from months at sea. She wrote to Sansa, her quill scratching in the candlelight. "I'm still your sister, but I'm something else, too. I'll find out what." The words flowed, a confession and a promise, but she didn't seal the letter. It stayed in her journal, unsent, a piece of her heart she wasn't ready to share. The stone glowed faintly when she dreamed of Jon, his cloak black against the snow, of Nymeria, howling in the wilds, of a shadow rising from the sea, its shape unclear but heavy with portent. She woke with a start, her breath misting, her hand on needle. The dreams were a warning, or perhaps a call, but she wasn't afraid. She'd faced worse than shadows. The days blurred into weeks, the sea a constant challenge, its moods shifting from serene to savage. Arya trained with her crew, teaching them tricks from Braavos, how to move silently, to strike with precision. They were a motley pack, but they were hers, their loyalty earned through storms and shared dangers. She'd spar on the deck, needle flashing, her movements a dance that drew cheers from the sailors. One, a Braavosi named Tycho, became her sparring partner, his rapier quick but no match for her speed. "You fight like a ghost," he said, panting, his grin wide. She smirked, sheathing needle. "Ghosts don't bleed." The crew's laughter warmed her, a fleeting echo of Winterfell's hearths, but she kept her distance, her heart guarded. The sea taught her patience, its vastness a reminder of her smallness, but also her strength. She'd chart the stars at night, her lightfolk lessons guiding her, the stone's glow a faint companion. Her journal grew thick with sketches, runes from the island, waves that curled like wolves, a map of a world she was building with every mile. A new land appeared one dawn, its shores fringed with coral, its hills lush with green. Arya led a party ashore, her boots sinking into soft earth, her senses alive. The land was alive with birdsong, its air sweet with flowers, but the ruins they found were older than Westlands, their stones carved with faces that seemed to watch. The crew whispered of gods, but Arya saw only history, a story waiting to be read. They found a spring, its water clear as crystal, and drank deeply, the taste sharp and clean. The land felt welcoming, but Arya's heart was restless. She wasn't here to stay. She sketched the ruins in her journal, her quill tracing eyes and waves, and left a marker, a direwolf carved into stone, a sign of her passage. The crew named the land Stark's Rest, but Arya shook her head. "It's just a stop," she said, her eyes on the sea. They sailed on, the horizon calling, the stone in her pocket glowing stronger now, its pulse a rhythm she couldn't ignore. At sea, Arya's dreams grew vivid, the stone a catalyst for visions that blurred past and future. She saw Winterfell's snow, Sansa's steady rule, Jon's exile beyond the wall. She saw the Night King's fall, her dagger flashing, and felt the weight of that moment, a hero's burden she hadn't wanted. The visions shifted, showing a shadow on the sea, vast and formless, its presence a threat or a promise. She woke each time with needle in hand, her breath ragged, her resolve unbroken. The crew noticed her quiet moments, their glances wary, but they trusted her, their captain who'd faced monsters and lived. One night, Tycho sat with her, the deck swaying, the stars bright above. "What do you seek out here?" he asked, his voice soft. Arya looked at the horizon, the stone warm in her pocket. "Myself," she said, the word heavy with truth. He nodded, as if he understood, and left her to the night. The sea was her mirror, reflecting her scars, her strength, her questions. The horizon flickered one dawn, a strange light dancing on the waves, like the island's glow, but wilder, untamed. Arya stood at the prow, her cloak snapping, her heart a mix of fear and hunger. Needle's Edge sailed toward it, the crew silent, their hands steady on the ropes. The light grew, a beacon or a warning, and Arya felt the stone pulse, its glow seeping through her pocket. Was it home, danger, or just another question? She didn't know, but she'd meet it with needle in hand and a wolf's heart. Her path, her own to forge. This is Arya's story, but it's not over. It's a tale of a girl who became a legend, and a legend who became something more. Want to join her journey? Hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and share this tale with your pack. The sea's calling. Where will it take us next?